Good evening, and welcome to a discussion on cosmic catastrophe. I'm sure many of you have heard the story of the comet coming to Earth 12,900 years ago. Fragmenting, perhaps. But they're always looking for a comet. And that's because in mythology, people are fearful of comets. And they're recorded, time immemorial, in texts. But for those of you that know me, know my background in cosmic catastrophe is in the geological sciences, where I have studied rocks across the country and worldwide based on a hypothesis that every 12,500 years or so, there's a major event that changes all environments on Earth in a very episodic and periodic fashion, catastrophic. And tonight we're going to break down the science. Got it. Now, many of you know about evidence of a cosmic catastrophe 12,800 years ago. We call the Younger Dryas event. And many people think that Earth collided with fragments of a comet. And this has made careers out of many men. But I don't think that's really the case. And my first piece of evidence tonight is the extremely large iron meteorite you're looking at right now, which is on display in a museum somewhere in the Northwest in the US, probably near Portland, because that's where this actual rocky meteorite was first discovered and cataloged scientifically and investigated. This is the Willamette Meteorite. Now, the famous Willamette Meteorite is almost unknown to all school children, and it may be the most important piece of evidence in the cosmic catastrophe that happened just 12,900 years ago, called the Younger Dryas event, which, by the way, don't believe the numbers or the dates, because I'm going to show you the data. This event didn't happen 12,800 or 900 years ago. It's an ongoing event from about 16,000 years ago to 10,000. And we're going to get to that. But let's just talk about the meteorite itself, the Willamette Meteorite. And we're going to get to a huge cacophony of evidence that this was not a comet, it was something else. So let's dive into the facts. Now, the Willamette Meteorite, scientists believe that this meteorite crash landed on Earth sometime between 12,000 and 15,000 years ago, which is directly in the time frame of that 12,800, 900-year-old onset of the Younger Dryas. And it landed in Canada or Montana and then drifted onto a piece of glacial ice in Oregon and ended up near almost the coast, near West Lynn, Oregon, traveling almost 1,000 miles. The meteorite's composition is 91% iron, and it's the largest meteorite ever found in North America. The Supreme Court of Oregon described the meteorite in 1905 in this opinion. In physical appearance, it is in the shape of a huge mushroom or an inverted bell. Its dimensions, 7 feet by 10 across the top and 4.5 feet thick, and when found was resting in a smaller end upon the surface of the Earth, not embedded in it. In its top, as it rested in place, are numerous cavities or potholes. Now, what that means is that this rock was moved by a river. Can you imagine the river that moved this rock? It weighs 15 tons. A ton is around 2,000 pounds. That's like 300,000 pounds of iron being pushed down a river. If that seems insane, well, the events we're going to unfold tonight will make that completely probable. Now, this meteorite in question was named Tomanawas, which is why we're talking about it, because a paper that came out today called Tomanawas, the meteorite that survived mega floods and human folly, really piqued my interest. And this rock, with arguably the most fascinating story on Earth, has an ancient name. It has an ancient heritage. And I never knew about it until 3 hours ago, which gets me quite upset because I should have been told about this at least after the $50,000 or $60,000 I paid as an undergraduate at university, or I should have been able to uncover it somehow during my studies, which I did not. And so therein lies the ruse, that there is very little sharing of information across boundaries to any scientists, and that is the nature of the problem. But let's continue with our hypothesis. Now, this object appeared on Earth and reached the planet sometime right here on the blue zone between 13,000 and 12,000 years ago. It is supposedly 12,900 or earlier, 15,000 years old. So as the planet was warming over the last 100,000 years, something happened right here at 15,000 years ago. And it's my opinion that we began a cosmic catastrophic event that occurred for thousands of years, dropping the planet into a mini ice age that lasted for 1,200 years. And we literally warmed up instantaneously to the interstadial or interglacial that we're living for the last 8,000 years, which is warm, perfect weather, unchanging, everything's good. So based on the ice core data, this rock, the Willamette Glacier, probably arrived during a peak warming and began the cooling. Each of these drop downs represents aerosols on our planet, creating cloud nucleation, more condensation, extreme cooling. It's basically Ice Age Earth, Snowball Earth, a mini version of that, where we rapidly cooled and froze buttercups in the mouths of mammoths, and they've been there until they've melted out sometime recently here. And so the freezing of the mammoths is this drop down, boom, to super cool, minus 50 C. And today we're living at around minus 30 C here. So big event here, froze the mammals. What kicked off this drop down in temps? The drop temperature, 20 degrees centigrade. Well, we're going to uncover that. There is a 100,000 year cycle based on the Vostok data that's very obvious. And for almost 4 decades, people have been arguing, is this Milankovitch perturbations of the orbital dynamics of our solar system, or is there another mechanism? Well, if you just simply come in here and start counting peaks between 100,000 year cycles, this cannot be Milankovitch related. It could be Milankovitch influenced, but there are only 5 precessional cycles per eccentricity cycle, and so on and so forth. You know, the obliquity cycle is only every 40,000 years, and we don't see that cycle. We see a composite of precession, obliquity, and eccentricity in these data sets. And so that, for decades, it led me to a dead end. What are these peaks and spikes? What is happening here? It's my contention that the exogenic effects of the perturbations of Milankovitch are directly related to the electrical charge of our environment, that this may be more of a charging of the solar system than an actual Newtonian mechanics of the system itself. that the Newtonian mechanics are definitely part of the charging. So we're looking at a 500,000 years of time. We can't even predict weather a week ahead. So therein lies the problem. Now, the Willamette Meteorite, let's get back to it as evidence that almost nobody knows what they're talking about. The Willamette Meteorite is not a comet. It's a rocky meteorite. Now, it could have been a fragment of a comet that broke up into 1,000,000 pieces, some rocky, some icy. But the evidence shows that in the last decade, we've landed on meteorites. They are rocks. We've landed on comets. They are rocks. They look the same. The only difference is comets are charged and meteorites are not. So if the object moving through space glows, it's a comet and it's sublimating ice based on the experts. But when we land on these comets, they're made of rock, just like this meteorite. So it's anyone's guess who's right or wrong. But I always like to take it back to the beginning. So back in 1904, myths and superstitions of the Oregon Indians was printed. Now, this dossier provides evidence that the meteorite in question, the Willamette Meteorite, did fall to Earth during the time of humans. They witnessed it and they revered it as a piece of their history. Now, Leah, my partner, Rex Bear, and many others have been investigating the nature of petroglyphs worldwide and what they mean. And I think it has everything to do with what was witnessed in this time period. And there may have been other events up here, including the Charlemagne event and other proton events. But this event was the beginning of language, and that our actual alphabetic system is based on plasma discharge that occurred from 12,900 years ago to about 11,500. Now let's talk more about the evidence. At about 16,000 years before present, we were experiencing the Wisconsinian glacial maximum. And this is just an artist's mock-up or rendition of what the ice sheet may have looked like. You can see here an ice-free corridor about to open up in a few thousand years. This is glacial max, but this baby's going to open up. And so is this corridor potentially, and maybe even this corridor. But the point I want to make is that there is so much continental ice that one cannot fathom the amount of power stored in these glacial reserves. This central glacier here, which is about to burst out and flood out here towards Missoula, is almost 3 miles thick. The eastern extremity, the Labradorian center, was up to 7 miles thick and estimated to be 5 miles thick here at New York City. Absolutely mind-boggling. This is just 16,900 years ago. And for some reason, starting around 15,000 years, this vast amount of fresh water began melting out to the east and the west. These two units melted out to the Pacific. This unit melted out to the Atlantic. And the catastrophic floods began. Now, in case you didn't know, cosmic catastrophe is not a theory. It's a working hypothesis with extreme amounts of data. Tonight we're talking about Tomanawas, a giant rocky meteorite that supposedly landed up here and was washed 1,000 miles to Portland. It weighs 15 tons. Can you imagine the river that would have to move that rock, even if it was floating on ice, for 1,000 miles if it weighed 15 tons? That's a heck of a river. And not only that, we have evidence in the last few decades with LIDAR and other techniques that there are over 500,000 impacts in this region I'm circling, and they're called the Carolina Bays. So there was debris hitting this region in an epic amount, like say 500,000 pieces hit here. And in the last year and a half, we've learned of 2 major Greenland impacts. In fact, NASA finds a possible second impact crater under the Greenland ice using LIDAR. These are big pieces, equivalent to the size of Tomahawk. Now, what you're looking at here is the Carolina Bays array, where over 500,000 impact structures on the east coast of the U.S. begin in South Carolina and end up near Canada. They have very similar symmetries, so they are related. Now, and the amount of corroborating evidence is overwhelming. Take a look at this. I just learned tonight that in Australia, many geologists like myself have also uncovered a similar Carolina Bay array. So these impact structures that are all from the same time, 12,900 years ago, are worldwide. What does that mean for you and I? Well, let's just figure out how this gigantic 15-ton meteorite got to Portland. If you look at the work of Randall Carlson and many others, now let's just give it all to Randall. He uncovered the Lake Missoula floods far before any people were talking about it, and he made it famous. The channeled Scablands itself, there's a whole cacophony of videos on it. But geologists like myself have been following him, and we corroborate this evidence wholeheartedly. So what you're looking at is the actual river system that took the rock from up here off the map, through the ice dam, across the entire state, and deposited it here near Portland. And it happened quite rapidly. First, there was an ice dam, and it failed. Within 23 hours, trillions of gallons flooded through the Scablands. Now, if you know what Niagara Falls look like, multiply that by 100, and you start to get the feel of this flash flood. By hour 38, inland oceans had arrived in places that there were no water. And this pushed that rock down further through the Wallula Gap, through the Dailies, into the Willamette Valley. Can you imagine how this 15-ton rock moved 1,000 miles from Canada over here to Portland? No one can. That is the nature of the event called the Younger Dryas. It's absolutely insane. The amount of power during this cosmic catastrophic event is so exponentially bigger than anything you've seen. And now I want you to put this in perspective, folks. When you're in your home during the biggest thunderstorm, let's say, that you've ever experienced, and the thunder and the lightning and the rain, you're just like, this is ungodly. I can't even imagine this. Imagine a time where rain fell in tens of feet, where the temperature fluctuated in 100 degrees. The skies were on fire. There was plasma dancing in the skies, and the entire Earth was being impacted by millions of objects for hundreds of years. That's what happened here. There was a major event to set it off, and we got bombarded for thousands of years, and then it stopped. And then the clouds settled, and it was frozen, tundra, for 1,200 years. And then the warming that was supposed to happen 3,000 years prior continued. And we've now sat at the interstadial bitching about Republican and Democrat issues and wearing masks for the flu. Who knew? Those are the facts. And thankfully, well, based on math, this event is not a comet. It's much bigger. The meteorite arrives, but it's only one of millions of objects. It's not just a single comet or cometary tail. It's a different tale to be told. Because the impact sites are not just in one area. And the myths and the superstitions tell a different story. They tell a story of rivers of fire, not only fire from the sky. And so it's anyone's guess. But we can probably all agree that the powers that be know more about the actual science than we're being told. And those that are claiming that a comet caused a multiple drop down of 10 degrees C over a 3,000 year period have some explaining to do. I don't want to point anyone out here, but this is not a single comet. If it is a comet, it kept coming back and coming back and coming back. I can see that, but I don't see him talking about it. So, working hypothesis on cosmic catastrophe that is true, period. And there's a piece of the evidence. Hope you got something out of the video. We're just beginning to understand the nature of the Younger Dryas event, the end of humanity, basically the erasing of high society prior to this event. But if over 500,000 of these objects came and hit Earth, I think you can understand why we don't have any evidence of that society.